This video is now going to be me revisiting some unfinished business with Heidi. Every day's a school day, especially when you know as little as I do. Then there was a problem. I had a solution. Cable ties. Butchering Heidi's brand new wing. I ended up cutting the wrong side of the line. At the end of the last video, I mentioned that this next video was going to be an update on a classic Ford that's being built by a friend of mine. I'm sure at least some of you were able to guess that I was, of course, talking about my good friend Lee Booth and his mega MX-5 turbo-powered 100E. Well, I went to visit Lee yesterday, and for, I think, the third time in a row, the weather was just too poor to film. He's done so much on the car since the last time we had an update, and I really want to do the video justice. I want to pull the car out of the garage and give you a good look at what he's been up to. So that update video will be coming in the not too distant future. So that means that this video is now going to be me revisiting some unfinished business with Heidi, my hearing aid beige BODY Mk2 Escort, and more specifically, her rear axle. Although before we get into that, I've got some unfinished business with my MIG welder, which I'm hoping I've now managed to fix. If you're a regular viewer of my content, click the like button now because it's a massive help. Alternatively, if you're new to the channel, click subscribe now and welcome. I'm Marcus Hayes, and today we're hopefully gonna get Heidi back together. All right, so if you saw the last video right to the end, you would have seen that I put a new liner inside the torch for the welder. I have since that video picked up my new tips from Screwfix. So I've got brand new tip, brand new shroud, and a brand new liner. So fingers crossed the welder will now work as good as it did before it stopped working halfway through doing the modification to this rear axle, which basically involves strengthening this area. Now, a couple of things that some of you mentioned in the comments of the last video. First of all, as it turns out, the copper wire, so I called it, isn't made out of copper. It's made out of steel, and it's coated in copper. Every day's a school day, especially when you know as little as I do. Also, a couple of you were saying that I didn't necessarily need to take apart this whole torch to fit the new liner. Now, it's worth noting that when I took the torch apart before I started filming the end of the last video to sort of manually test the liner before I then put it all back together because I wanted to show the whole process on film, I noticed that when I tried to push the liner back in, at which point I did have this bit screwed back on, I found that it was just getting caught on that bit because it's curved, and that's why I decided that when I replaced the liner, I wanted to completely dismantle the torch. Also, when I first took this apart, again off camera before I started filming the end of the last video, I noticed that this bit was actually loose, and I think that's why the wires that attach the trigger to the rest of the wiring kept coming undone previously. So yeah, you probably don't necessarily need to take the end of the torch apart, but in my case I'm glad I did, and it gave me an opportunity to show you guys that it is really easy to take apart. So the next stage is, of course, to feed the wire back through the welder. This is not the dirty, rusty, corroded one that I showed you in the last video. This is the mint one that I've been using to weld with. But yeah, a couple of you were actually suggesting that I make sure I do the tension up correctly on the rollers, which is controlled by how much you screw this down. And I actually found a video on YouTube this morning showing how to set that tension right. I, of course, use a generator around here for my power. So rather than me trying to talk over the noise of that, I think I'll use a voiceover to explain what I learned in that video whilst I feed this wire through. And yeah, hopefully we'll get this welder back up and running and then finish the welding on Heidi's rear axle. First things first, I untangled the wire from where it was attached to its spool, being careful not to let it unravel, using my finger to hold it. Then I cut the dodgy bit off of the end and fed it into the white tube here. Then once it had passed the rollers, I fed it into this metal tube here. And once I knew it was lined up with the groove in the roller, I clamped the top roller down and tensioned the little thumb screw a couple of turns. I made sure that the torch was laid out nice and straight to avoid any restrictions. Then I fired up the generator and the welder and pulled the trigger on the torch. It was working fine without the rollers slipping, but I wanted to back the tension off to find the point where it would slip. But with virtually no tension on the rollers at all, it still wasn't slipping. Even with the tension so light that the thumb screw bit is able to disengage. With the wire coming through the end of the torch, I gripped it lightly with my fingers and pulled the trigger, and it still wasn't slipping. So I assumed it was okay. I attacked the welds on the axle with a wire brush and a drill to remove any surface rust, ground away any dodgy looking welds from the last video when the welder started playing up, and then continued where I left off in the last video, welding the strengthening plates onto Heidi's axle. And if I'm honest, the welds didn't look great. I felt like I needed some more heat, but it was at its maximum, and I couldn't slow the wire down either. I tried heating the job up with a blowtorch, which didn't make any difference. Then I tried moving the earth wire closer to where I was welding, which didn't help either.
It's literally the same. The welder's literally the same as before I replaced the liner.
Just gets melted to the tip, as if the wire's coming through too slow. And then when you're welding, the welds are all proud, as if the wire's coming through too fast or it's not hot enough. But as you would have just seen in the clips, this can't go any hotter and this can't go any slower.
So I don't know if the welder's like on its limits in terms of, you know, the thickness of this metal. You know, maybe it's not man enough. But one of you guys in the comments did say that you've got this exact welder and you was able to do thicker metal with it. So I don't know what's going on. Something's not right with the welder, and it seems like it wasn't the liner, but I can't afford to spend another whole week trying to weld this axle up. So all I can do really is hope that the welds that I was able to do before the welder started playing up are strong enough, and I'll just persevere so I can get some welds around the sides of these plates. Yeah, because I need to get this done. All right, so I managed to get at least some welds around the sides of all these plates. It cost me 3 tips in the end, which is madness. I did experiment with the settings on the welder a little bit, and I just turned the heat down a bit, which kind of seemed to make the welder work better in terms of I wasn't burning tips, but then that inevitably means that the welds just aren't hot enough for this thick metal. A lot of these welds are, yeah, they're just not good enough. I mean, you can see some discolouring from the heat, so I'd like to think that accumulatively, all these welds will hold these plates on strong enough. And I'm sure this is going to be adequate. You know, ultimately, these plates are just strengthening something that was already there, and it's just something to sort of fight against the tension of the U-bolts. But yeah, this is a right mess. But I'm sure once I ground it down, it'll look a bit better. I attacked my ridiculously proud welds with my angle grinder, and then I waved the wire brush on the drill at the welds as well. The job was now looking a million times better. I resisted the urge to bare metal the whole axle and just hit my welded areas with the epoxy primer from Kent Europe. Whilst it was drying, I removed the anti-roll bar, then I grabbed the gloss black paint from Kent Europe and gave all the epoxy primered areas a couple of coats. I was glad to see the end of this welding job, but the painted bits definitely make the rest of the axle look even worse. But it's only a drift car. With the black paint dry, it was time to pull Heidi out the garage, and I could finally get her off the little trolleys and onto some axle stands, ready for the axle reinstallation. Alright, so I mentioned in the last video that I'm going to be putting this thing back together with some lowering blocks and extended U-bolts so that I can lower the rear suspension. This is going to help me finalise the position of the screw-on rear arches, which is one of the final things I need to do before I can realistically get this thing ready for paint. Unfortunately, these lowering blocks are only 1-inch lowering blocks, and Heidi is set to be at least 3 inches lowered at the back. I'm going to be fitting the 2-inch decambered leaf springs that are currently fitted to Maud, and a lowering block to lower her by, as I say, at least 3 inches. I might even be able to lower her a bit more than 3 inches because she's going to be running wide arches. So with Heidi still having her stock leaf springs fitted, you know, this is literally going to lower the car by 1 inch, which isn't going to be enough for me to determine where I need to mount the rear arches. So I've got an idea. I'm
I'm actually going to chuck in some of these small bits of wood as well and just stack these up with the lowering blocks to give around a 3-inch drop at the back. Obviously, won't be driving the car with wood in there, but yeah, for this sort of mock-up purpose, it's going to be ideal. I lifted the axle onto the leaf springs just behind where it was going to be mounted. With the passenger side lowering block in place, I realised I was going to have to drill a little dimple in one of the bits of wood so that it would clear this little bump in the lowering block. I located the wood and the axle, then repeated the process for the other side, but then there was a problem. I realised I only had 2 extended U-bolts. I actually needed 4, but I had a solution. Cable ties. I then realised that the U-bolts weren't long enough to be used with the bump stops, so I took the bump stop out and put both sides together with the base plates and 1 U-bolt and some cable ties either side. I then tightened the nuts on the U-bolts and then got Heidi's wheels back on and got her back on the ground. Alright, well Heidi is looking slammed. Really cool to see her actually sitting level now, of course. And she actually looks like a much longer car now, which is often the case when you lower a car anyway, to be honest. But yeah, with the wing sort of poking backwards beyond the bodywork and with the whole car now lowered, yeah, it does make it look like a really long car. Although, to be honest, the lens on the camera is not showing it as well as I can see it with my eyes. But yeah, now that the rear end is lowered, I can definitely see where the centre of the wheel is going to sit. And ultimately, that's where I need the centre of this ridiculous plastic arch to sit. Now, it's worth noting that because I use the wood and stuff to lower the car, potentially the axle isn't perfectly located. So you could argue that the wheel isn't, you know, millimetre accurate in terms of being central in the arch, but I just tried to eyeball it as I was doing up the U-bolts, and yeah, I'm sure it's somewhere near. Now, this is potentially going to be a bit of a mission to get the rear and the front arches mounted, because I want to try and do it right. You know, I've already screwed a rear arch on and then changed my mind and welded the holes up, so I want to get it right this time. I think I'll leave the fronts until after I've done the rears. I will be doing all of this in this video though. Looking forward to doing the fronts because it means I can cut away any metal that I don't need on the front wings. And I've got something else that I'll then be able to mount to the front end. And it's another bit that has been robbed from poor old Maud. Anyway, let's look at getting this rear arch position finalised. So, couple of thoughts. I'm definitely now not going to try and get this to follow this shape. This arch may end up stopping here, so it might just get cut off there, or maybe I can make a piece afterwards to join up to the seal, maybe use the bits that I cut off. I'm going to forget about anything below this swage line. With a job like this, there comes a time where you've just got to stop talking and thinking and just send it. I've got the holes drilled and got the arch screwed in place. And to be honest, it wasn't looking too bad, considering it's just a universal arch. All right, so I think this is as good as it's going to get. It's pretty much centralised. This bit of the arch here does a funny kink, just due to how it's being pulled around here. But that's kind of how an Escort arch is anyway. It sort of goes up like that and then sweeps down, so I'm not too bothered about that. And ultimately, I'll just try and get the other side the same-ish. But before that, let's have a look at the front. All right. So this should, in theory, be easier, but it is only a theory. And I need to move the arch forward to account for the extreme caster that we've got in this car now. After a little bit of head scratching, I dived in with my drill, and the front arch was definitely a whole lot easier to mount than the rear one was. I marked the excess that I wanted to cut off, and then removed the arch again, ready for the fun bit. I marked roughly how much of the wing I was going to be cutting out. Then I grabbed my angle grinder and started butchering Heidi's brand new wing. I then trimmed the front arch and trimmed a bit off of the rear arch as well, and then got the front arch screwed back on. Black Friday is upon us, and I've jumped on the bandwagon by slashing the price of tons of really cool official MH merchandise at marcushayesuk.com. Get 50% off all mugs, and if you're quick enough, whilst stocks last, for every mug you buy, you're going to get a free OG mug as well. Get 30% off all stickers, magnets and decals, 30% off of our genuine carbon fibre keyrings and air fresheners, and 30% off our ever popular workshop banners.
There's no need for a discount code. All the sale items prices have already been reduced on the website. Stock is very limited though, and time is running out. So head over to marcushayesuk.com now to support and represent the brand and save yourself some dough. Also check out the Black Friday sale at petrolheadstyle.com as well for other really cool car themed clothing and products. It's a new day and I've now got the passenger side arches screwed on as well, which means it's on to the next piece of the puzzle. I am of course talking about this front spoiler, which has been tragically stolen from poor old Maud, who's definitely lost a bit of her character now. I've already spent a little bit of time roughly trying to mock up the spoiler, and I've already got a dilemma that I need to overcome. But before we get into that, with regards to the arches, the front wings have definitely only been roughly cut out. Definitely going to need to cut more metal out, especially around this front area. And I can't do that until I finalise the position of the front spoiler. Also, with the rear arches, I've got this piece here, one of the pieces that I cut off. And yeah, I was just mucking about with this when I was around here the other day. And you can kind of see what I was talking about with regards to adding a piece there so that this doesn't look so ridiculous. Obviously, this would get chopped, maybe, you know, up here, make it more of a sort of flowy shape. So, yeah, I'll definitely be able to tidy this up one way or another. And I'll be putting the rally style mud flats behind the front and the rear arches. So once all that's done, it will look a little bit less ridiculous than it does now. Not completely though, you know, this car is supposed to look a bit ridiculous, but I'll crack on with all of that after I get the car painted. I just want to focus on what I need to get done so that I can get the body shell painted, and getting these arches mounted was one of those things, as is getting this front spoiler fitted. All right, there it is, a bit more aggression at the front. Admittedly, this front spoiler looks way too tame for the arches, but it is what it is. For now, I'm definitely going to try and use this front spoiler. But what I'm trying to figure out is, should I have the arch on top of the splitter like this? Or maybe I should cut the splitter so that, you know, the splitter attaches to the wing and the arch attaches to the wing, so they're just like next to each other. Or should I have the splitter on top of the arch, which is kind of harder to mock up. It would require some cutting, but yeah, just have the splitter overlapping the arch slightly. Now, if they're overlapping, then you've obviously got to, you know, if it was like this, obviously this would have to be trimmed back a little bit. Then I would have to like cut a little bit off of the splitter, like this end, so that it all slots together without a gap here. And similarly, if I had it like this, then I would need to do something so that I don't have a gap here. So yeah, that's my dilemma. And I don't think I'm ready to make that decision today, if I'm honest. Now, this splitter was actually sent to me by Ben Thacker. Shout out to you if you're watching. I've actually been seeing on his social media that he's bringing his Drift Mk2 Escort back to life. So looking forward to seeing that out in action again at some point in the future. But yeah, it's worth noting that this splitter, one side was shorter than the other. So one side's been trimmed more than the other. I think this side is the shortest side. Let's have a look. Yeah, so this side wasn't trimmed as much as the other side. So whatever I decide to do with this front splitter, I'm obviously going to even up the sides. So even if I was going to have the arch on top, say, I still need to trim this side to match the other side. But yeah, I'm really not sure. But I think whatever I decide to do in terms of the ends, I think it makes sense to mount the middle of the front spoiler. Now, this has got 4 holes on it in total, and I had it riv nutted to Maud, so 2 there and then 1 either end. So I'm going to utilise these holes that are already in this splitter, try and get it lined up as best as possible, and just screw this to the front panel. And yeah, then we can have a look at this thing mounted without the jack under the front. I got the spoiler lined up as best as I could, and then got drilling and screwing, and then I made my mind up about how I was going to mount the sides of the spoiler against the arches. I used my knee to push the spoiler tight against the front panel, and then I marked where the arch met the front spoiler, and then I cut it out with my angle grinder. After some trial and error to perfect my cutout and get the parts sitting nice next to each other, I screwed the arch to the wing
Then grabbed a file to perfect my cutout some more. Then I screwed the spoiler to the wing as well. And I think now you can see what I'm trying to achieve. Once I'd repeated the processes for the driver's side, I used the cutouts to help me cut the passenger side to match the driver's side. And voila, Heidi's body kit, you could say, is now all fitted. And I'm actually now starting to see what I envisioned when I decided to turn this thing into a bit of a crazy drift toy. All right, we are getting somewhere now, and I'm really glad that I did make my mind up as to how these bits were going to sit next to each other. I did make a bit of a mistake on this one, actually. When I marked, I knew that I didn't want to go right to my line because I'd rather cut not enough off and then gradually cut more off until it fits, but I ended up cutting the wrong side of the line. So I should have cut slightly above the line, but I ended up cutting slightly below the line. So that's a bit annoying. I might be able to fill that in with fiberglass. What I'm actually going to do with the bottom of this arch, to sort of have it pulled out a bit, for one, so that, you know, you get that nice width when you're looking from the front, but also to potentially help me with wheel clearance, because I don't know if I keep all this arch, whether it's going to foul when I'm running, you know, bigger wheels and we're at full lock drifting and stuff. So yeah, what I intend to do is maybe glue a little bracket to the inside of this splitter, and then I can screw this screw hole on the arch to it, so that will just sit like sort of flush with the splitter there. On this side it sort of sits like that, but the other side it doesn't. And yeah, when I sort of glue that bracket inside, it'll probably be like an L piece, so it's nice and strong in there, and then I might be able to build up a bit of fiberglass there to close that gap again. But you know, none of this matters that much. I may end up putting another fixing on the splitter here and then the same the other side, but yeah, really happy with how this is going to look. And yeah, the car in general is now starting to look a bit nuts, which was the intention ever since I decided to turn this into a bit of a drift toy. Now that I have finalised how the arch and the splitter are sitting, I'll be able to figure out exactly how much more I want to cut out of the wing. I'm going to cut as much as I can out, but you know, making sure that I leave enough meat there. The rear end, yeah, that will be to be continued. You know, once I sort of mount some mud flaps, or at least figure out how that's going to work, then I'll be able to potentially cut a bit more away. I suppose I could just cut as much away as I would if I was going to sort of have the rest of the arch on here like that, which I doubt I will. And also with the wheels now further forward, this isn't going to be an issue with rubbing. So yeah, I may just cut a bit more of that out and yeah, leave most of it, just tidy it up a bit. But yeah, need to do more cutting on the wings, cut out what I now know that I don't need to leave, and just tidy it up in general. And then I think that's the last thing that I need to do really before I can realistically finish all the filler work on this thing and ultimately get it ready for paint. I'm in a lucky position where I've got a couple of options in terms of how and where I'm going to be painting this thing, but yeah, I do need to get it done relatively soon if I'm going to stay on track with my plans with the car and yeah, with life in general, to be honest. So anyway, there she is. She's definitely come a long way since the start of this video. She of course didn't even have a rear axle fitted then, but yeah, happy with the progress that I've made in this video, even though I have been around here a good few days during this video. The days are getting shorter, it's cold, we're trying to avoid the weather and just get things done, you know, trying to be as productive as I can be, you know, despite the restraints of weather and time, etc. But I am going to end this video here. If you did think it was any good, as always, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Click subscribe if you're new to the channel. Check the links in the description to follow me on Facebook, TikTok and Instagram. As always, I'll leave a link in the description to my own website where you can go and check out the official MH merchandise, and you can grab car parts and accessories on there. And don't forget, we're doing some Black Friday sales with the MH merch. I'll also leave a link to the Petrolhead Style website, which is my other company that supplies other car themed clothing and cool products, and we're doing some Black Friday sales on there as well. My email address will be in the description for anyone who wants to contact me. Huge thanks as always to my patrons for your ongoing support. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.